Ambassador HFY trembled as she approached the communication array, her 6 delicate limbs barely supporting her ethereal frame. The crystalline structures that comprised her people's technology hummed with desperate energy, broadcasting their plea across the galaxy. Behind her, the Council of Whispers murmured in their musical language, their translucent forms flickering with anxiety. "The signal is prepared, Ambassador," chirped technical harmonizer Velthin, his voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Our message of distress has been encoded with our coordinates and the urgency of our situation." HFY nodded, her gossamer wings rustling nervously. The Velthari had always been a peaceful species, their entire civilization built around harmony, art, and the gentle cultivation of their garden worlds. They had never known violence, never needed to defend themselves. Their technology focused on beauty and sustainability rather than warfare. Now, facing the approaching armada of the Krexthal Dominion, they were utterly helpless. "Send it to the Galactic Council," she whispered, her voice carrying the melodic undertones typical of her species. "Surely the Altrurians will respond, or perhaps the Zindaki Collective. They have always advocated for peace." The message burst forth from their homeworld of Velthara Prime, racing through hyperspace toward what the Velthari believed was the most advanced and peaceful civilization in their galactic sector. Their databases, ancient and carefully maintained, indicated that the signal would reach the benevolent Altrurians, known throughout the galaxy for their wisdom and their powerful defensive fleets. But the Velthari databases were old, very old, and space is vast, with civilizations rising and falling like waves upon an endless shore. Light years away, the message struck a relay beacon that had been forgotten for millennia. The beacon, damaged by cosmic radiation and temporal drift, redirected the signal along pathways that no longer matched any current star charts. The distress call tumbled through space, bouncing from one dead relay to another, each jump taking it further from its intended destination. On the bridge of the Krexthal flagship Bone Render, War Chieftain Thrakor studied the tactical displays with satisfaction. His species had evolved from apex predators on a world where only the strongest survived. Standing nearly 3 meters tall, covered in chitinous armor, and bearing 4 arms ending in razor-sharp claws, the Krexthal were the antithesis of the gentle Velthari. "Report," Thrakor rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. "The garden worlds lie defenseless before us, War Chieftain," reported his tactical officer. "Our scouts confirm no military installations, no weapons platforms, no fleet defenses. The Velthari possess nothing but agricultural vessels and transport craft." Thrakor's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his kind. "Perfect. Their worlds will make excellent breeding colonies once we've cleared out the current inhabitants. How long until we reach the outer system?" 17 cycles, Va Chieftain." "Good. Begin broadcasting the standard surrender demands. Not that it matters. They'll serve us better as fertilizer for our own colonies." The Krexthal Armada consisted of 200 warships, each designed for maximum destruction and intimidation. Their hulls were black as void, studded with weapon ports, and adorned with the bones of previous conquests. They had swept through this spiral arm of the galaxy like a plague, consuming everything in their path. Meanwhile, on Velthara Prime, panic had begun to set in. The Krexthal demands had been received, translated by their linguistic AIs, and the content had sent shockwaves through their peaceful society. Unconditional surrender or complete annihilation. Red High Counselor Miralens, her usually melodious voice cracking with fear. They demand we evacuate our worlds so they can use them as breeding colonies. They speak of us as if we were insects to be swept aside. The Council of Whispers fell silent, a rare occurrence in their normally musical deliberations. Never in their recorded history had the Velthari encountered such naked aggression, such casual cruelty. "Have the Altrurians responded to our distress signal?" asked HFY desperately. No response from any of the peaceful civilizations. reported Velthin, his chimes now discordant with stress. The signal was sent correctly, but we've received no acknowledgement. Unknown to the Velthari, their message had continued its wayward journey through space, bouncing from relay to relay, growing fainter and more distorted with each jump. It had passed through sectors controlled by long-dead empires, through nebulae that scrambled its encoding, through regions of space where reality itself grew thin. Finally, after a journey of weeks that should have taken hours, the signal reached its final destination. But instead of arriving at the pastoral worlds of the Altrurian Republic, it struck a monitoring station on the edge of a system marked in galactic databases as Quarantine Zone, Death World Classification, Approach Prohibited. The system was called Sol by its inhabitants, though few galactic species knew this name. To the greater galactic community, it was simply listed as Terrace System, Extreme Hazard Classification, contains Death World Civilization. At Lunar Monitoring Station Alpha, Communications Specialist Sarah Chun was finishing her night shift when the proximity alarms began shrieking. Her coffee mug, emblazoned with the logo of the Terran Defense Force, rattled on her desk as she quickly pulled up the signal analysis. "What the hell?" she muttered, her fingers flying over the holographic interface. The signal was weak, distorted, and clearly alien in origin. But as the translation protocols engaged and the message began to decode, her expression shifted from confusion to grim determination. "Commander Harrison, you need to see this," she called to her superior officer. Commander James Harrison approached her station, his scarred face bearing the marks of humanity's recent conflicts with their own kind. The Third World War had ended only 50 years ago, leaving Earth united but forever changed. The discovery of faster-than-light communication and travel had come from salvaged alien technology found in the ruins of crashed vessels, giving humanity a glimpse into the vast and dangerous galaxy beyond their solar system. "What V we got, Chun?" "Distress signal, sir. Alien origin. It's been bouncing around space for weeks by the look of it." She enhanced the audio, and the translated message filled the command center. "This is Ambassador HFY of the Velthari Confederacy. Our worlds are under threat from an aggressive species calling itself the Krexthal Dominion. We have no military capability and 17 standard time cycles before they arrive. We request immediate assistance from any peaceful civilization capable of providing aid. Our people number in the billions across 7 garden worlds. We have no weapons, no defenses. Please, if anyone receives this message, we are dying." The command center fell silent. Harrison's jaw tightened as he processed the implications. "How did this signal reach us, Chun?" "Our system is supposed to be isolated." "That's the thing, sir. According to the routing data, this was supposed to go to something called the Altrurian Republic. But the signal got bounced around by damaged relays and ended up here instead. They have no idea they're talking to us." Harrison studied the holographic display, showing the signal's tortuous path through space. 17 cycles. How long is that in our time? Based on the temporal markers in the signal, approximately 16 days, sir. But this message is already a week old, so we have maybe 9 days. Harrison was quiet for a long moment, thinking, what do we know about these Krexthal? Chin pulled up additional data that had been embedded in the signal. From what the Velthari included in their message, they're a militaristic species, conquest-oriented. The signal contained some tactical data the Velthari managed to gather. She paused, reading the translation. "Sir, according to this, the Krexthal have 200 warships approaching the Velthari system." 200? Harrison nodded grimly. "And the Velthari have what for defense?" "Nothing, sir. The message is clear. They're a completely peaceful civilization. No military technology, no weapons, no defense fleets. They're gardeners, essentially. Their whole society is built around cultivation and art." Harrison stood silent for several minutes, weighing options. Humanity had only recently achieved faster-than-light capability, and their fleet was small, maybe 50 ships total, most of them converted civilian vessels with military modifications. They were still rebuilding from the devastation of their own global war. But in those same wars, humanity had learned something that few species in the galaxy understood: how to fight when everything was at stake. "Give me Admiral Rodriguez on Priority Channel," Harrison ordered, "and patch me through to the President. We need to have a conversation about first contact protocols." "Sir," Chun said hesitantly, "are we really considering this? We don't know anything about galactic politics, and we're talking about going up against a force 4 times our size." Harrison looked at her with eyes that had seen too much of humanity's own capacity for both cruelty and heroism. "Chun, I've got a 16-year-old niece who loves to garden. Spends all her time nurturing plants, creating beauty. Remind you of anyone?" Chun looked back at the translated message, at the desperate plea from a species that sounded like they'd never hurt anyone in their existence. "I'll get the Admiral on the line," she said quietly. Within 6 hours, every major government on Earth had been briefed. The United Earth Council convened an emergency session, while the Terran Defense Force began preliminary mobilization procedures. The debate was fierce but brief. President Elena Vasquez addressed the council with characteristic directness. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're being asked to risk our entire fleet to save a species we've never met, in a region of space we've never been to, against an enemy we know nothing about. The strategic argument says we should ignore this message and focus on our own security." She paused, looking around the room at the representatives of humanity's former warring nations. "But there's another argument. 50 years ago, we nearly destroyed ourselves because we couldn't look beyond our own immediate interests. We learned, the hard way, that sometimes doing the right thing is more important than doing the safe thing. These Velthari sound like everything we wish we could have been: peaceful, creative, focused on growth rather than destruction. And they're about to be wiped out by exactly the kind of predators we swore we'd never become again." The vote was closer than historians would later record, but the decision was made. Earth would respond to the distress signal. Admiral Carmen Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the TDF Indomitable, humanity's newest and most powerful warship. Around her, the Terran Defense Force's entire fleet made final preparations for humanity's first interstellar military deployment. "Status report," she commanded. "All vessels ready for hyperspace jump," "Admiral," reported her tactical officer. "We have 47 combat-capable ships, plus 3 supply vessels and 2 medical frigates." Rodriguez nodded. It wasn't much by galactic standards, but humanity had learned to make the most of limited resources. Every ship in the fleet had been designed with one principle in mind: maximum survivability in hostile conditions. They were heavily armored, redundantly shielded, and packed with weapons systems that prioritize reliability over sophistication. "What's our ETA to the Velthari system?" "At maximum hyperspace velocity, 7 days, Admiral. We'll arrive with approximately 48 hours to spare." "Assuming the Velthari timeline is accurate," Rodriguez mused, "we're flying blind into a situation we don't fully understand, against an enemy we've never encountered." "Admiral," called Communications Officer Torres, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth." "Put it through." President Vasquez's image appeared on the main screen. "Admiral, final authorization codes are being transmitted now. You have full discretionary authority to conduct first contact and engage hostile forces as you see fit. The entire planet is watching." "Understood, Madam President. We won't let them down," Carmen, the President said, dropping formality for a moment. "Bring our people home." The transmission ended, and Rodriguez turned to address her crew. Throughout the fleet, similar scenes were playing out as captains prepared their people for the unknown. "Today, we make history," Rodriguez announced over the fleet-wide channel. "We're not just defending strangers, we're taking our first step into the galactic community. How we handle ourselves out there will define how the galaxy sees humanity for generations to come." She paused, looking out at the stars that humanity was about to venture into for the first time as protectors rather than explorers. "We've spent 50 years proving we could stop being our own worst enemy. Today, we prove we can be someone else's best ally. All ships, initiate hyperspace jump in 60 seconds. It's time to show the galaxy what humans do when the innocent are threatened. The countdown began, and one by one, the ships of humanity's fleet tore holes in space-time and vanished into hyperspace, carrying the hopes of one species toward the desperate plea of another. Behind them, Earth turned silently in its orbit, its people united in prayer and hope for their defenders. Ahead lay the unknown, a desperate alien species, a ruthless enemy, and humanity's first test on the galactic stage. The Velthari had sent their distress signal to the wrong civilization entirely. They had asked for help from peaceful gardeners like themselves, from wise counselors, and diplomatic protectors. Instead, they had reached the children of a death world, a species that had learned to thrive in Earth's crushing gravity, toxic atmosphere, and constant natural disasters. A species that had nearly destroyed itself learning how to wage war, and had emerged from that crucible with one ironclad principle. Never again would they stand by while innocents suffered. The galaxy was about to learn what humans meant by never again. The hyperspace journey gave Admiral Rodriguez time to study everything humanity knew about the situation they were heading into, which unfortunately wasn't much. The Velthari distress signal had included some basic information about their attackers, but it painted a grim picture. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the president's younger sister and the fleet's xenobiologist, stood before the holographic display in the Indomitable's briefing room, addressing the senior staff of the fleet. From what we can determine from the signal data, the Krexthal are a predatory species that evolved from pack hunters, she explained, manipulating the hologram to show reconstructed images based on the Velthari's observations. They're physically imposing, 3 meters tall for arms, natural weapons in the form of claws and mandibles. Their technology seems focused entirely on warfare and conquest. Captain Sarah Ming of the heavy cruiser Defiant leaned forward. What about their ships? Any technical specifications? Limited data, but what we have suggests they favor overwhelming firepower over finesse. Their vessels are designed to intimidate as much as destroy. They apparently decorate them with the bones of their conquered enemies. A grim chuckle went around the room. Humans had their own dark history with intimidation tactics. Numbers? Asked Admiral Rodriguez. 200 ships, according to the Velthari count. Mostly what they classify as war vessels, with a few larger craft they've designated as world breakers. The room fell quiet. 200 ships against humanity's 47 was daunting odds by any measure. Admiral, spoke up Commander Janet Hayes from the carrier Yorktown. Are we sure about this? We're risking our entire fleet on a species we've never met. Rodriguez looked around the room at the faces of humanity's best military minds. I'll be honest with you all, this is a hell of a risk. But I keep thinking about something President Vasquez said in the final briefing. We're not just fighting for the Velthari. We're announcing to the galaxy what kind of species humanity is. Do we want to be known as the people who turned their backs when innocents cried for help? She manipulated the holo display to show the Velthari system. Besides, think tactically. If we let the Krexthal consume 7 populated worlds without opposition, they become stronger. Eventually, they might turn their attention to other systems, maybe even ours. The meeting continued for hours as they refined their battle plans. The element of surprise was their greatest asset. The Krexthal had no idea that their victims had managed to call for help, and they certainly didn't know that help was coming from a previously unknown species. Meanwhile, in the Velthari system, desperation had reached new heights. The Krexthal fleet had arrived at the edge of their territory and begun a systematic approach, broadcasting increasingly brutal surrender demands. High Counselor Miralens stood before the assembled population of Velthara Prime's capital city. Her translucent form flickered with barely contained anguish as she addressed her people. "My children," she began, her voice carrying across the crystal spires and floating gardens that comprised their beautiful city. "The enemy has given us one final chance to surrender. If we do not respond within 2 of their time cycles, they will begin what they call cleansing operations. The crowd of Veltheri, thousands of delicate beings whose greatest joy was nurturing life, began to keen in their musical language. Their song of sorrow rose like wind through crystal chimes, beautiful even in despair. Have the peaceful civilizations responded to our call? Asked someone from the crowd. Ambassador HFY stepped forward, her gossamer wings drooping. We have received no response. It appears our message may not have reached its intended destination. The song of sorrow grew louder, but beneath it, something else emerged. Elder Threndau, ancient even by Veltheri standards, rose from his position among the council of whispers. If we must die, he said, his voice still carrying the pure tones of his species despite his age, then let us die as Veltheri. We will not surrender our worlds to be used as breeding colonies for monsters. We will not flee and leave our gardens to be desecrated. The crowd's song shifted, becoming something humanity would have recognized as a battle hymn, though the Veltheri had no words for war in their language. They called it a song of final growth, the melody a gardener might sing while tending plants they knew would not survive the coming winter. Aboard the Krexthul flagship Bone Render, War Chieftain Thrakgor was growing impatient. Still no surrender from the garden dwellers? He rumbled to his communications officer. None, War Chieftain. In fact, they seem to be broadcasting some form of music across all channels. Thrakgor's mandibles clicked in annoyance. Music, typical of herbivore species, to waste time on such meaninglessness when facing extinction. No matter. Begin the preliminary bombardment of their outermost world. That should demonstrate the futility of resistance. The Krexthul fleet moved with predatory precision toward Veltheros 7, the agricultural world on the system's edge. It was home to 50 million Veltheri who tended vast gardens that fed much of their civilization. The first salvo of Krexthul weapons turned a 1,000-square-kilometer farming collective into a smoking crater. The message was clear: surrender or watch everything they had built be destroyed piece by piece. But 47 hyperspace signatures had just appeared at the very edge of the system's sensor range. Communications Officer Torres was the first to spot them. Admiral, we're detecting multiple vessel signatures ahead. Looks like holy shit. 200 contacts, just like the Veltheri said. Language, Torres Rodriguez said mildly, though her own expression was grim. But I share the sentiment. Put me on fleet-wide communication. Her image appeared on screens throughout the human fleet. All ships, this is Admiral Rodriguez. We found our target, and the situation is exactly as bad as we expected. 200 enemy vessels, and they've already begun attacking civilian targets. She paused, looking at the tactical display, showing the massive enemy formation. I won't lie to you, we're outnumbered 4-1. But we have advantages they don't know about. We're faster, we're tougher, and most importantly, we know what we're fighting for. Every one of those enemy ships represents a choice to prey on the innocent. Every one of our ships represents the decision to stand up for those who can't defend themselves. Captain Wong of the destroyer Shanghai spoke up on the command frequency. Admiral, what's our approach? Do we announce ourselves? Rodriguez considered for a moment. Negative. We go in silent until we're in optimal firing position. Let's give them the same courtesy they're giving their victims. None at all. The human fleet moved deeper into the system, using their advanced stealth technology to mask their approach. Humanity's bitter experience in global warfare had taught them the value of getting the first shot. Dr. Vasquez, monitoring communications from the indomitable science station, suddenly straightened. Admiral, I'm picking up a broadcast from the planet's surface. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. She patched the audio through to the bridge. The song of the Veltheri filled the command center, a complex harmony of voices raised not in surrender, but in defiance. It was alien, impossible to fully understand, but its meaning was universal. We will not yield. Jesus, whispered Tactical Officer Stevens. They know they're going to die, but they're still singing. Admiral Rodriguez felt something harden in her chest, the same feeling she'd had as a young officer during the Battle of New Sydney when enemy forces had targeted civilian shelters. It was the feeling that had driven humanity to finally unite after millennia of conflict, the absolute, burning refusal to let predators triumph over innocence. "All ships, prepare for combat," she announced. "We're going to show these bastards what happens when they pick on gardeners within range of a Deathworld species." The Krexthal were completely focused on their bombardment of Veltharos 7, savoring the terror of their victims. War Chieftain Thrakgor was particularly enjoying the musical broadcasts from the planet. The fear songs of dying prey always made victory sweeter. War Chieftain, his sensor operator suddenly called out, "I'm detecting unusual readings at the system's edge." Define unusual. Unknown energy signatures. Very faint, but they don't match any known species in our databases. Thrakgor's interest was piqued. Another species coming to aid the garden dwellers? Excellent. We can add their bones to our collection as well. But as his fleet's sensors attempted to penetrate the strange energy signatures, they found nothing. The readings vanished as if they had never been there. Sensor malfunction, concluded the operator. Probably interference from a gas giant's magnetic field. Thrakgor dismissed the readings and returned to watching the destruction of the Velthari farms. He had no way of knowing that 47 ships were closing in on his fleet using stealth technology developed by a species that had perfected the art of warfare through necessity. The human ships moved like ghosts through space, their hulls absorbing and deflecting sensor sweeps, their engines running on minimum power to reduce their signature. They had learned these techniques during humanity's darkest hour, when Earth's factions had fought with weapons that could crack continents. "Range to optimal firing position?" Rodriguez asked quietly. 15 minutes at current approach speed, replied her tactical officer. "We'll be within effective range of their entire formation." "Good. Have all ships select their primary targets. I want every shot to count when we announce ourselves." Throughout the fleet, targeting computers locked onto Krexthal vessels. The human ships were smaller than their opponents, but they carried weapons designed by a species that understood the value of making every shot lethal. Captain Lisa Park of the heavy cruiser Soul studied her target, one of the larger Krexthal vessels that was currently bombarding civilian targets on Veltharos 7. "Target locked," reported her weapons officer. "Readings indicate heavy armor, but standard configuration. Our penetrator rounds should punch right through." "Good. Make sure your first salvo counts. We probably won't get a second chance at surprise." Similar conversations were taking place throughout the human fleet. Each ship had been designed with humanity's hard-learned lessons. Hit hard, hit fast, and never give your enemy time to recover. On the surface of Veltharos 7, Elder Thrindal felt the ground shake as another Krexthal bombardment struck nearby. The agricultural collective where his own offspring had spent their lives nurturing food for their people was now a burning wasteland. But still he sang, and still his people sang with him. If these were to be their final moments, they would face them as Velthari, with harmony, with dignity, and with defiance that no amount of destruction could silence. High above, War Chieftain Thrakgor was growing bored with the one-sided destruction. "How much longer before they surrender?" he asked his communications officer. "They haven't stopped their musical broadcasting, War Chieftain. If anything, it's growing louder. Stubborn fools. Very well, target their capital city directly. Once we crater their government center, they'll..." Alarms began shrieking throughout the Krexthal flagship. Thrakgor spun toward his sensor station, where his operator was staring at his displays in shock. "War Chieftain, multiple contacts bearing directly for our formation." "What? Where do they come from?" "Unknown. They just appeared on sensors. 47 vessels, unknown configuration, closing fast." Before Thrakgor could respond, space around the Krexthal fleet suddenly lit up with weapons fire. But these weren't the energy beams or plasma bolts that most galactic civilizations used. These were solid projectiles, moving at relativistic speeds, designed to punch through armor like it was paper. The first salvo from the human fleet caught the Krexthul completely off guard. 17 enemy vessels simply vanished in brilliant explosions as human kinetic penetrators found their targets. The surprise was so complete that several Krexthul ships actually collided with each other as they tried to respond to threats from multiple directions. Unknown vessels. Thrakgor roared into his communications array. Identify yourselves. The response came from Admiral Rodriguez aboard the Indomitable, and her voice carried a cold fury that would have been familiar to anyone who had witnessed humanity's capacity for righteous anger. This is Admiral Carmen Rodriguez of the Terran Defense Force. You are targeting innocent civilians and must cease hostilities immediately. Thrakgor's translator struggled with the alien language, but the meaning was clear enough. Terran? I have never heard of this species. You dare interfere with a Krexthul conquest? We dare a lot more than that, Rodriguez replied. You have 30 seconds to withdraw from this system, or we will withdraw you permanently. The war chieftain's mandibles spread in what passed for laughter among his kind. 30 seconds? Unknown aliens. You face the might of the Krexthul Dominion. We are 200 ships strong, conquerors of a dozen worlds. What are you? Admiral Rodriguez looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew, men and women who had grown up hearing the stories of humanity's brush with extinction, who had sworn never to let such darkness triumph again. We, she said simply, are humans, and you just made a very big mistake. The battle for the Velthari system had begun. War Chieftain Thrakgor had fought hundreds of battles across dozens of star systems, but he had never seen anything like the tactical display now showing before him. These humans fought with a viciousness that caught even his predator instincts off guard. Status report, he roared as another Krexthul vessel disappeared under a barrage of kinetic projectiles. 23 ships destroyed, War Chieftain, his tactical officer reported, his voice cracking with stress. The enemy vessels are smaller than ours, but incredibly fast. Their weapons ignore our energy shields completely. How is that possible? They're using solid projectiles, War Chieftain. Kinetic weapons. Our shields were designed to deflect energy weapons, not physical mass, traveling at these speeds. Thrakgor snarled. In all their conquests, the Krexthul had never encountered a species that still used kinetic weapons. Most civilizations had moved beyond such primitive technology millennia ago, favoring energy weapons that could be easily powered and recharged. But these humans seemed to have perfected kinetic warfare to a deadly art form. Aboard the Indomitable, Admiral Rodriguez watched her tactical display with grim satisfaction. The opening salvo had been even more effective than hoped. The Krexthul ships were powerful, but their defenses were optimized for the kind of warfare most galactic species practiced. They're trying to reorganize, reported Lieutenant Commander Stevens. Looks like they're forming up into a defensive sphere. Let them, Rodriguez replied. Torres, patch me through to the fleet. All ships, execute Maneuver 7. Throughout the human fleet, captains smiled grimly as they received the order. Maneuver 7 was a tactic developed during the siege of Europa Station, a high-speed engagement designed to prevent enemy forces from organizing effective defense. The human ships suddenly scattered in all directions, their enhanced engines allowing them to accelerate and change course far faster than the larger Krexthul vessels could match. To the alien sensors, it looked like the attackers were fleeing in panic. They're breaking apart, reported the Krexthul tactical officer. The unknown vessels are scattering. War Chieftain Thrakgor felt a surge of satisfaction. Excellent. They realized they were outmatched. All ships pursue and destroy. Don't let any escape to report our position to other civilizations. But the Krexthul's satisfaction was short-lived. The human ships weren't fleeing, they were repositioning. Like wolves circling a herd, they moved to attack from multiple angles simultaneously, denying their enemies any safe direction to face. Captain Sarah Ming aboard the heavy cruiser Defiant found herself in perfect position to demonstrate why human military doctrine emphasized flexibility over raw firepower. Her ship dropped out of its evasive pattern directly behind a formation of 6 Krexthal vessels. "All weapons, rapid fire," she ordered. "Target their engines first. I want them dead in space." The Defiant's guns spoke with the voice of humanity's industrial might. Each kinetic projectile was a rod of depleted uranium accelerated to 10% of light speed. They struck the Krexthal ships with the force of small meteors, punching through armor plating that had withstood energy weapons for decades. 3 enemy vessels lost propulsion immediately, spinning helplessly as their engine compartments vented atmosphere. The remaining 3 tried to turn and fight, but the Defiant was already moving, using its superior maneuverability to stay in the enemy's blind spots. Similar scenes played out across the battlefield as human ships demonstrated the tactical flexibility that had been hard-won through centuries of warfare on Earth. Every captain had studied the great battles of human history, from ancient naval engagements to the brutal space conflicts that had finally united their world. But the Krexthal were learning fast. War Chieftain Thrakgor might have been surprised by the humans' initial assault, but he had survived dozens of campaigns by adapting to new threats. "All ships, ignore the fast movers," he commanded. "Focus fire on any vessel that slows down to engage. And give me a firing solution on their largest ship." The largest human vessel was Admiral Rodriguez's flagship, the Indomitable. As the fleet commander, she had positioned herself to coordinate the battle, making her ship a natural target for enemy attention. "Admiral," called out Tactical Officer Stevens, "multiple enemy ships converging on our position. They're trying to concentrate fire." Rodriguez looked at the tactical display, noting how the Krexthal were adapting their strategy. "Smart. They're learning. Helm, evasive maneuvers. Let's see how well they can track a moving target." The Indomitable began a complex evasion pattern, but the Krexthal had numbers on their side. Energy beams began lancing through space around the flagship as over 30 enemy vessels focused their fire. "Shields at 60% and falling," reported the engineering station. "We can't take much more of this concentrated fire." Rodriguez was about to order a withdrawal when salvation came from an unexpected source. Captain Janet Hayes aboard the carrier Yorktown had been waiting for exactly this situation. "All fighters, launch immediately," Hayes commanded. "Target the ships engaging the flagship." The Yorktown's fighter bays opened, disgorging 48 single-seat combat craft. Unlike the larger ships, these fighters were designed purely for speed and maneuverability, carrying just enough firepower to threaten larger vessels' critical systems. Lieutenant Sarah Kim led the first squadron in a screaming dive toward the Krexthal formation, her fighters targeting computer-locked onto the engine compartments of the nearest enemy ship. "This is Raptor Leader," she transmitted to her squadron. "Remember your training. Hit and run. Target their weak points. Don't get caught in a slugging match." The human fighters swarmed over the Krexthal formation like angry hornets, their precision-guided missiles seeking out sensor arrays, weapon mounts, and engine systems. The larger ships tried to swat them down with defensive fire, but the fighters were too fast and too numerous. War Chieftain Thrakgor watched in growing frustration as his perfectly organized attack dissolved into chaos. These humans fought like nothing he had ever encountered. They seemed to have solutions for every tactical situation, backup plans for their backup plans. "War Chieftain," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving transmissions from the planet's surface." "The Garden Dwellers? Are they finally ready to surrender?" "No, War Chieftain. They're thanking the humans. The musical broadcasts have changed. They're no longer singing of death, but of hope." On the surface of Veltheros 7, Elder Threndal felt tears of joy streaming down his face as he watched the incredible battle raging in the space above his world. The alien ships, these humans, were actually fighting the Krexthal to a standstill. "Sing, my children," he called to his people. "Sing of the gardeners who came from far stars to tend our needs. Sing of the warriors who heard our call when all seemed lost." The Velthari song changed again, becoming something their language had never contained before, a war song, but one filled with gratitude rather than hatred. It spoke of defenders from beyond the void, of strangers who became brothers in humanity's greatest need. High above, Admiral Rodriguez heard the song, translated through her communication system, and felt a familiar fire kindle in her chest. It was the same feeling that had driven humanity to finally unite, the same emotion that had powered their reconstruction after the devastation of global war. "All ships," she announced on the fleet frequency. "You hear that music? Those people are counting on us. We didn't come all this way to let them down." The human fleet's response was immediate and devastating. Ships that had been fighting defensively suddenly went on the attack with renewed fury. The Shanghai and Mumbai coordinated a devastating crossfire that eliminated an entire Krexthal squadron. The Berlin used its superior speed to position itself perfectly for a killing shot on one of the enemy's larger vessels. But it was Captain Lisa Park aboard the Soul who delivered the blow that changed the entire battle. She had been studying the Krexthal flagship's movement patterns, looking for an opening. "There," she said to her tactical officer. "They have to expose their flank to maintain their command position. One good shot." The Soul's main guns charged with the power of a small star. The ship's primary weapon was a railgun that could accelerate a tungsten projectile to 15% of light speed, enough kinetic energy to crack a small moon. "Firing solution locked," reported her weapons officer. "Fire." The tungsten rod crossed the space between ships in less than 2 seconds. It struck the bone render amidships, punching completely through the vessel's armor, command deck, and out the other side. The Krexthal flagship didn't explode. It simply came apart, its structure unable to absorb that much kinetic energy. War Chieftain Thrakor had just enough time to see the impossible happen. His flagship, symbol of Krexthal might, being torn apart by a single projectile before the void claimed him. The destruction of their flagship sent shockwaves through the Krexthal fleet. These aliens had just killed their war chieftain in single shot. Panic began to spread as ship after ship reported critical damage from the relentless human assault. Sub-Commander Vextar, now the senior surviving officer, tried to rally his forces. All ships formed defensive positions around the heavy carriers. We still outnumber them significantly. But the numbers advantage that had seemed so overwhelming was rapidly evaporating. The humans were systematically dismantling the Krexthal formation with surgical precision, using tactics that seemed to anticipate every defensive maneuver. Aboard the Indomitable, Dr. Elena Vasquez was monitoring Krexthal communications when she noticed something important. "Admiral," she called out, "their communications are becoming increasingly disorganized. I think we've disrupted their command structure more than we realized." Rodriguez studied the tactical display. The Krexthal ships were still fighting, but their movements were becoming increasingly uncoordinated. Ships were getting in each other's way, failing to support each other effectively. They're used to overwhelming weaker opponents, she realized. They've never had to fight an extended engagement against someone who could hit back effectively. It was a crucial insight. The Krexthal were apex predators, evolved to hunt and dominate. But predators often struggled when their prey fought back with intelligence and coordination. "All ships," Rodriguez announced, "implement Maneuver 12. Let's show them what happens when prey evolves." Maneuver 12 was humanity's answer to superior numbers, a coordinated assault designed to isolate and destroy enemy forces piecemeal. It required perfect timing and absolute trust between ship captains, exactly the kind of cooperation that had finally brought peace to Earth. The human fleet reformed into 3 distinct attack groups, each targeting a different section of the Krexthal formation. The aliens found themselves fighting 3 separate battles simultaneously, each one designed to prevent them from supporting the others. Sub-Commander Vextar watched his fleet being systematically dissected and felt something he had never experienced before: genuine fear. The Krexthal had conquered dozens of worlds, but they had never faced opponents like this. These humans seemed to have been born for warfare. "All ships," he transmitted desperately, "withdraw to minimum safe distance. We need to reassess the situation." But the human fleet wasn't interested in giving their enemies time to regroup. As the Krexthal tried to withdraw, They found their escape routes blocked by fast-moving human vessels that had anticipated their retreat. Captain Wong of the destroyer Shanghai smiled grimly as a ship dropped out of hyperspace directly in the path of fleeing Krextal vessels. "This is for every innocent they've murdered," he said quietly, and ordered his weapons to fire. The battle raged for 6 hours, but the outcome had been decided in the first 10 minutes when a human fleet demonstrated that they were not another helpless victim species. By the time the last Krextal vessel either surrendered or was destroyed, only 32 enemy ships remained operational out of the original 200. The Velthari system was free, and humanity had announced their arrival on the galactic stage in the most dramatic way possible. But the real consequences of this day were only beginning to unfold. The silence that followed the battle was profound. For the first time in 6 hours, the space around Velthara 7 was quiet except for the gentle hum of life support systems and the distant signals from the planet below. Admiral Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, looking at a tactical display that showed the scattered remains of what had once been a mighty Krextal fleet. 32 enemy vessels had surrendered when it became clear that continued resistance meant certain destruction. The rest were either debris fields or limping toward the system's edge with critical damage. "Damage report," she requested quietly. "Fleet-wide casualties are surprisingly light," reported her executive officer. "We lost 3 ships entirely, the Prague, Cairo, and Wellington. 14 ships have significant damage, but remain operational. Total personnel losses are 137 souls, Admiral." Rodriguez closed her eyes briefly. Every number represented someone who wouldn't be going home to Earth, someone who had died light years from everything they had ever known. But she also knew that without their sacrifice, billions of Velthari would have faced a much worse fate. "Communications," she said, "patch me through to the planetary surface. It's time we properly introduced ourselves." The response came in the form of that beautiful, crystalline music that had sustained the Velthari throughout their darkest hours. But now it was different. Instead of defiance in the face of death, it was a song of joy and gratitude that seemed to make the very air shimmer with emotion. Ambassador HFY's image appeared on the main screen, her gossamer wings trembling with emotion. "Brave defenders from beyond the stars," she said in the melodious language of her people, which the translation computers rendered into English. "We do not know how to thank you. We sent our call into the void expecting death, and instead found salvation." "Ambassador," Rodriguez replied, "I am Admiral Carmen Rodriguez of the Terran Defense Force, representing the species known as humans. We received your distress signal and came as quickly as we could." "Humans," HFY repeated the word like a prayer. "We had never heard of your people. Our signal was intended for the Altrurian Republic, so we gathered. It seems your message took an unplanned route through space and reached us instead." Rodriguez paused, considering her next words carefully. "Ambassador, this is humanity's first contact with other intelligent life. We don't know the protocols for this situation." The Velthari ambassador's eyes widened, an expression that translated surprisingly well across species lines. "First contact? You mean to say that you risked your entire fleet, fought a battle against odds of 4 to 1, to save a species you had never encountered before?" Dr. Elena Vasquez stepped into view of the communications pickup. "Ambassador, may I ask what you know of our kind? What do your databases say about humanity?" HFY consulted something off-screen, her musical voice taking on a confused tone. "According to our records, your star system is classified as a quarantine zone containing a Deathworld civilization. But that cannot be correct. Deathworld species are supposed to be savage, violent, unsuitable for galactic contact." The bridge of the Indomitable fell silent. Rodriguez and her crew exchanged glances suddenly, understanding why they had never heard from other galactic civilizations. "Ambassador," Rodriguez said carefully, "how long have your people known of Earth's existence? Our astronomical surveys detected signs of your civilization approximately 300 years ago. But The classification warnings in the galactic database were so severe that no one ever attempted contact. Deathworld species are considered too dangerous for civilized contact. Dr. Vasquez felt a chill run down her spine. 300 years? You've known about us since before we achieved spaceflight. And no one ever tried to make contact because of a database classification. It is the way of things, HFY said sadly. The galactic community learned long ago to avoid Deathworld species. They are usually too violent to coexist with peaceful civilizations. Admiral Rodriguez found herself experiencing a complex mix of emotions. Anger at being written off without even being contacted, sadness at the lost opportunities for peaceful contact, and a grim understanding of why humanity's development had proceeded in isolation. Ambassador, I think there's been a significant misunderstanding. Yes, humans evolved on what you would call a death world. Yes, we have a history of conflict. But we also have something that apparently isn't well understood by the galactic community. We know the difference between necessary violence and cruelty. To illustrate her point, she gestured to the tactical display. We could have destroyed every Krexthal ship in this system. Instead, we accepted the surrender of 32 vessels when their crews realized the battle was lost. Our medical ships are currently rendering aid to enemy wounded. Is this the behavior of the savage species your databases describe? HFY was quiet for a long moment, her crystalline eyes reflecting the light from her world's setting sun. No, she said finally. No savage species would cross interstellar space to defend strangers. No violent civilization would show mercy to defeated enemies. Then, perhaps, Rodriguez suggested gently, it's time the galactic community got to know humanity properly. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent transmission from Captain Hayes aboard the Yorktown. Admiral, we have a situation developing. Long-range sensors are detecting multiple hyperspace signatures approaching the system. Big ones, and a lot of them. Rodriguez felt her stomach drop. Krexthal reinforcements? Negative, Admiral. The energy signatures are different. These ships are massive, much larger than anything we've encountered. On the surface of Velthera Prime, Ambassador HFY was receiving similar reports from her own people's sensors. Her expression shifted from joy to concern. Admiral Rodriguez, she said urgently, our observatories are detecting the arrival of a Galactic Council fleet. 12 Dreadnought-class vessels, and over 50 support craft. Galactic Council? Rodriguez asked. The governing body of our local galactic civilization. They must have detected the battle. Admiral, you must understand, unauthorized military action in galactic space is strictly forbidden. The Council takes a very dim view of what they classify as primitive species engaging in warfare. Dr. Vasquez moved to the science station, pulling up what limited information they had about galactic politics. Admiral, based on what we know, this could be very bad. If they consider us a death world species, and we just fought a major battle, they might decide we're too dangerous to be allowed to continue existing. Rodriguez finished the thought. The irony was bitter. Humanity had just risked everything to save innocent lives, only to potentially face judgment from the very civilizations that had classified them as too violent for contact. Options? Rodriguez asked her senior staff. We could withdraw immediately, suggested Captain Ming via communications link. Jump back to Earth and pretend this never happened. Leaving the Veltheri to explain why their saviors suddenly vanished, Rodriguez replied. That doesn't seem fair to them. We could stay and try to explain our actions, offered Dr. Vasquez. Make the case that we were defending innocent lives against a species that apparently has a 300-year-old prejudice against us, Rodriguez pointed out. That seems like a hard sell. Ambassador HFY's voice cut through their deliberations. Admiral, if I may, there is a third option. The Veltheri Confederacy could formally request that you remain in our system as our invited guests and protectors. Galactic law recognizes the right of any civilization to invite others to their space, regardless of their classification. Rodriguez considered this. Would your people be willing to do that? You barely know us. HFY's response was immediate and firm. Admiral, your people crossed interstellar space to answer the desperate call of strangers. You risked your lives and ships to defend those you had never met. You showed mercy to defeated enemies and offered aid to the wounded. These are not the actions of the savage species our databases described. They are the actions of heroes. She paused, her voice taking on the formal tones of diplomatic declaration. The Velthari Confederacy hereby formally invites the human fleet to remain in our space as honored guests and welcome allies. Any attempt by outside forces to remove you will be considered an act of aggression against our sovereignty. The declaration was broadcast across all frequencies, ensuring that the approaching Galactic Council fleet would receive it before entering the system. Admiral Rodriguez felt a surge of gratitude toward the delicate beings who had just put their own reputation on the line to protect their rescuers. Ambassador, we are honored by your invitation and accept it gratefully. The human fleet repositioned itself into a defensive formation around the populated worlds of the Velthari system. They were still outnumbered by the approaching Council fleet, but they held the moral high ground and the legal protection of the Velthari invitation. Admiral, called Communications Officer Torres, were being hailed by the Council fleet. Audio only. Put it through. The voice that filled the bridge was cold, precise, and utterly without warmth. Unknown vessels. This is Fleet Admiral Kethvar of the Galactic Council Defense Force. You are operating military vessels in violation of galactic quarantine protocols. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. Rodriguez took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would either open a new chapter in human history or potentially end it. Fleet Admiral Kethvar, this is Admiral Carmen Rodriguez of the Terran Defense Force. We are operating in this system at the formal invitation of the Velthari Confederacy, in defense of innocent lives threatened by Krexthal aggression. We have broken no galactic laws. The silence that followed stretched for several tense minutes. When Fleet Admiral Kethvar finally responded, his tone suggested he was not accustomed to being contradicted. Admiral Rodriguez, according to our records, your species is classified as unsuitable for galactic contact due to violent tendencies and technological primitiveness. Your presence here represents a contamination of civilized space. Dr. Vasquez moved to Rodriguez's side, whispering urgently, Admiral, request a formal diplomatic hearing. Under galactic law, any species has the right to appeal their classification. Rodriguez nodded. Fleet Admiral Kethvar, I formally request a diplomatic hearing to address our species classification. Recent events would seem to indicate that your database may contain outdated information. Another long pause. Very well, Admiral Rodriguez. A formal hearing will convene aboard my flagship in 12 standard hours. You will bring a diplomatic representative and submit to a full evaluation of your species' suitability for galactic contact. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the Indomitable in contemplative silence. Well, Rodriguez said finally, I guess we're about to find out if the galaxy is ready for humanity. Dr. Vasquez looked at the approaching Council fleet and felt the weight of representing her entire species. Admiral, what if they decide against us? What if they determine we're too dangerous? Rodriguez looked out at the stars, thinking of Earth and the billions of humans who had no idea their fate might be decided by aliens they had never met. Then, we show them the same thing we show the Krexthal, she said quietly. That humans don't go down without a fight, especially when we're fighting for our right to exist. The next 12 hours would determine whether humanity took its place among the galactic community or found itself at war with civilizations they had never imagined. But one thing was certain, the galaxy would never be able to ignore the species from Sol again. The Deathworld dwellers had arrived on the galactic stage, and they had announced themselves by doing something the galaxy apparently didn't expect from savage species. They had saved innocent lives at great cost to themselves. Now they would face judgment from civilizations that had written them off centuries before humanity had even reached for the stars. The trial of humanity was about to begin. The Council flagship Eternal Harmony was a monument to galactic civilization, 3 kilometers of gleaming metal and crystal that seemed to bend light around itself in impossible ways. As Admiral Rodriguez and Dr. Vasquez approached in their shuttle, they could see dozens of other vessels from various species maintaining perfect formation around the massive command ship. "Have you ever seen anything like it?" Dr. Vasquez whispered, staring at the alien vessel's architecture. "The closest thing would be some of the cathedral spires back on Earth," Rodriguez replied. "But even those don't capture this sense of age." "How old do you think this ship is?" Their pilot, Lieutenant Shun from the original monitoring station, checked her instruments. According to the energy signatures, some parts of this vessel appear to be several thousand years old. They've been building onto it for millennia. As their shuttle docked with the Council ship, they were met by what could only be described as a floating crystal formation that somehow managed to convey both authority and disdain. The being spoke through harmonic vibrations that their translation devices rendered as an imperious voice. "I'm Arbiter Prime Zelnaga. You will follow proper protocols for contact with civilized species. No sudden movements, no displays of aggression, no documentation devices." Rodriguez and Vasquez exchanged glances. They had expected this kind of reception, but experiencing it firsthand was still jarring. The hearing chamber aboard the Eternal Harmony was a vast spherical room with floating platforms arranged in a complex three-dimensional pattern. Representatives from dozens of species occupied various platforms, their forms ranging from the familiar humanoid to configurations that challenged the imagination. At the center of it all was Fleet Admiral Kethvar, a being that resembled a cross between a jellyfish and a tree, with flowing tendrils that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. When he spoke, the entire chamber fell silent. "We convene this emergency tribunal to address the unprecedented situation in the Veltheri system," his translated voice announced. "A quarantined Deathworld species has engaged in unauthorized military action within galactic space, resulting in significant destruction and potential contamination of civilized worlds." Admiral Rodriguez felt her temper flare at the clinical description of their rescue mission, but Dr. Vasquez placed a restraining hand on her arm. "The species in question," Kethvar continued, "claims to have responded to a distress signal. However, their actions demonstrate the exact violent tendencies that led to their quarantine classification 3 centuries ago." A floating platform descended to the chamber's center, clearly intended for the human representatives. As they took their positions, Rodriguez could feel the weight of hundreds of alien eyes studying them. "You may present your defense," Arbiter Prime Zelnaga announced. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward first as the appointed diplomatic representative. "Honored arbiters, we stand before you today to request a formal review of humanity's classification. Recent events demonstrate that the assumptions underlying our quarantine may be fundamentally flawed." A ripple of what might have been laughter moved through the chamber. Fleet Admiral Kethvar's bioluminescent patterns shifted to what seemed like an amused configuration. "Dr. Vasquez, is it? Your species destroyed 168 Krexthal vessels in a matter of hours. Your weapons technology appears designed for maximum lethality. How does this not confirm your classification as a violent, primitive species?" Rodriguez stepped forward, unable to remain silent any longer. "With respect, Fleet Admiral, we destroyed those ships because they were murdering innocent civilians. The Krexthal fleet was systematically bombarding populated worlds. Would a civilized response have been to let them continue?" "A civilized response," came a new voice from one of the upper platforms, "would have been to contact the proper authorities and allow qualified peacekeeping forces to address the situation." Rodriguez looked up to see a being that resembled a tall, graceful plant with what appeared to be flowers for a head. The translation identified it as Ambassador Thelvin of the Altrurian Republic, the very civilization the Veltheri had originally tried to contact. "Ambassador Thelvin," Dr. Vasquez said carefully, "how long would it have taken for qualified peacekeeping forces to respond to the Veltheri distress call?" "Standard protocol requires a committee review, threat assessment, and resource allocation approval. The process typically takes 60 to 90 standard cycles. The Veltheri had 17 cycles before the Krexthal arrived, Rodriguez pointed out. By the time your peacekeeping forces deployed, there would have been nothing left to save but empty worlds. Another voice joined the debate, this one from a creature that looked like a moving constellation of lights. The Deathworlder raises an interesting point, but it misses the fundamental issue. Galactic civilization depends on order, process, and restraint. When species take unilateral military action, even with good intentions, they destabilize the entire system. Dr. Vasquez pulled up a holographic display using the chamber's technology. If I may, honored arbiters, I'd like to present some evidence that might reframe this discussion. The display showed the Sol system, with detailed scans of Earth's biosphere. This is our homeworld. As you can see, it is indeed what you classify as a death world. High gravity, toxic atmosphere by galactic standards, extreme weather patterns, and significant geological instability. Murmurs moved through the chamber as the assembled beings studied the hostile environment that had shaped humanity. But here's where your databases don't show, Vasquez continued, manipulating the display to show Earth's current state. Despite our violent history, humanity achieved global peace 50 years ago. We eliminated poverty, ended our world wars, and began working together as a single species. Ow! The question came from Arbiter Prime Zelnaga, and for the first time, there seemed to be genuine curiosity in the crystal being's harmonic voice. Rodriguez stepped forward. We learned. We nearly destroyed ourselves in what we called the Third World War. When we saw what our violence had cost us, billions dead, entire continents poisoned, we made a choice. We decided that our strength would be used to protect rather than conquer. She gestured to the display, which now showed the human relief efforts during the Reconstruction period. For 50 years, we've been building instead of destroying. We've been learning to work together instead of tearing each other apart. And when we heard the Veltheri call for help, we didn't hesitate because we remembered what it was like to face extinction. Fleet Admiral Kethvar's patterns shifted to something that might have indicated skepticism. Pretty words, Admiral, but your actions in the Veltheri system suggest otherwise. You showed no restraint, no attempt at negotiation. You simply attacked. We attempted to communicate with the Krexthal, Rodriguez replied firmly. We gave them 30 seconds to withdraw. They responded by mocking us and continuing their bombardment of civilian targets. She paused, looking around the chamber at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. Tell me, honored arbiters, what would you have done? The Krexthal were actively murdering innocent beings. Every minute we spent in negotiation was another minute of civilian casualties. Sometimes, the only way to stop a predator is to show it that it's no longer the apex hunter. Ambassador Thelvin's flower-like head swayed in what might have been distress. But violence begets violence, Admiral. By responding with force, you've likely created a cycle of revenge. The Krexthal will seek retaliation. Actually, came a new voice from the chamber's entrance that appears unlikely. The entire assembly turned to see Ambassador HFY of the Veltheri entering the chamber, her gossamer wings catching the light as she moved. Behind her came several other Veltheri representatives, their crystalline voices harmonizing in greeting. Ambassador HFY, Fleet Admiral Kethvar said with obvious displeasure, this tribunal was not scheduled to include Veltheri testimony. Under Article 7 of the Galactic Charter, any civilization directly affected by the events under discussion has the right to provide testimony. HFY replied with surprising firmness. The humans saved our people. We believe the tribunal should hear what actually happened. Arbiter Prime Zelnaga's crystals chimed in what might have been resignation. Proceed, Ambassador. HFY moved to the center platform, her voice taking on the formal tones of diplomatic testimony. Honored arbiters, the Veltheri Confederacy wishes to provide evidence regarding humanity's character and intentions. A new holographic display appeared, showing the aftermath of the battle in the Veltheri system. This is the current status of the 32 Krexthal vessels that surrendered during the battle, HFY announced. As you can see, they're being held in humane conditions. Their wounded are receiving medical treatment from human medical ships. Their crew members are being treated according to the same standards as human prisoners of war. She manipulated the display to show the human medical frigate Mercy docked with a damaged Krexthal vessel. When the humans could have executed their enemies or left them to die in space, they chose instead to save lives. This is not the behavior of a savage species. Another section of the display showed human engineers working alongside Velthari technicians to repair damage to the agricultural world. Human technical teams are currently helping us restore our damaged agricultural systems. They have shared their technology freely and asked for nothing in return except our friendship. Fleet Admiral Kethvar's patterns had shifted to what looked like confusion. But the database clearly indicates the database is 300 years out of date. HFY interrupted with unusual directness. The humans you describe in those records no longer exist. The species that answered our call has evolved beyond the primitive classification you've assigned them. Dr. Vasquez seized the moment. Honored arbiters, this is exactly what we're asking for, a chance to be judged by our current actions rather than our ancient history. Yes, humanity has a violent past, but we've learned from it. We've grown beyond it. She activated another display showing the human fleet's current configuration around the Velthari worlds. Right now, our entire fleet is protecting 7 billion innocent beings from potential Krexthal retaliation. We're not conquering, we're not exploiting, we're not demanding tribute or territory. We're simply ensuring that a peaceful species can continue to exist. Admiral Rodriguez stepped forward for what she knew might be humanity's final statement. Honored arbiters, I understand your concern about uncontrolled violence. I've seen what happens when military force is used without restraint or moral guidance. But I've also seen what happens when good people do nothing while innocents suffer. She looked directly at Fleet Admiral Kethvar. You had 300 years to make contact with humanity, 300 years to guide our development, to share the wisdom of galactic civilization. Instead, you wrote us off as too dangerous to approach. You left us alone to either destroy ourselves or learn to be better on our own. Her voice carried the weight of Earth's history, both its tragedies and its triumphs. Well, we learned. We chose to be better. And when strangers cried out for help, we chose to answer that call, even knowing it might cost us everything. If that makes us too dangerous for galactic civilization, then perhaps galactic civilization needs to examine its own values. The chamber fell silent for several long minutes. The various species representatives communicated among themselves in languages and methods that range from musical tones to electromagnetic pulses to complex biochemical signals. Finally, Arbiter Prime Zelnaga's crystals rang with a clear, decisive note. The tribunal has reached a consensus. The quarantine classification for the Sol system and its primary species is hereby revoked. A collective intake of breath moved through the chamber. Furthermore, humanity is granted provisional membership in the Galactic Council, with full rights to trade, travel, and diplomatic relations throughout civilized space. Admiral Rodriguez felt her knees nearly buckle with relief, but the Arbiter wasn't finished. However, humanity will be subject to a probationary period of 50 standard years, during which their actions will be closely monitored. Any return to the aggressive patterns that led to their original classification will result in immediate re-quarantine. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward. We understand and accept these conditions, Honored Arbiter. There's one final matter, Fleet Admiral Kethvar announced, his patterns now showing what might have been respect. The Velthari Confederacy has formally petitioned to enter into a defensive alliance with humanity. This is unprecedented. No civilization has ever requested military protection from a newly contacted species. Ambassador HFY's voice rang with pride. The Velthari have watched how humans conduct themselves in victory. We have seen their mercy toward defeated enemies, and their dedication to protecting those who cannot protect themselves. We would be honored to call such beings our allies. Rodriguez looked at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization, many of whom were studying humanity with new interest rather than suspicion. Honored arbiters, humanity accepts the Veltheri alliance with pride. We pledge to defend their worlds as we would our own. As the tribunal concluded and the various species representatives began to disperse, Rodriguez found herself approached by Ambassador Thelvin of the Altrurian Republic. "Admiral," the plant-like being said in their musical voice, "I owe you an apology. When we received the Veltheri distress signal routing confirmation, we assumed it was a translation error. We never imagined it was genuine." "I'm sorry, what do you mean?" Thelvin's flower head swayed in what appeared to be embarrassment. "The signal was supposed to reach us. Our systems received the routing confirmation that it had been delivered. We assumed the Veltheri had received our standard response about committee review and resource allocation." Dr. Vasquez stared at the alien ambassador. "Are you saying you knew the Veltheri were under attack, and you chose not to respond immediately? Our protocols require proper assessment before military deployment. We have procedures. Your procedures," Rodriguez interrupted, "would have let 7 billion innocent beings die while you filled out paperwork." The truth of it hung in the air between them. The supposedly advanced, civilized galactic community had been perfectly willing to let the Veltheri be exterminated rather than risk the complications of immediate action. Ambassador Thelvin seemed to wilt under the weight of that realization. Perhaps there is wisdom in the human approach to such matters. As the human representatives prepared to return to their fleet, Arbiter Prime Zelnaga approached them one final time. "Admiral Rodriguez, Dr. Vasquez, the Council has a proposition for you." Rodriguez turned, wondering what new complication might be developing. "We would like to establish a permanent human liaison office within the Galactic Council. Your species' unique perspective on conflict resolution and crisis response could be valuable to our civilization." Dr. Vasquez and Admiral Rodriguez exchanged glances. It was more than they had dared to hope for. Not just acceptance, but an invitation to help shape galactic policy. "We would be honored," Rodriguez replied, "though I suspect you might find human methods somewhat unconventional." The crystal being's harmonic laugh filled the chamber. "Admiral, after today's revelations, I believe unconventional might be exactly what galactic civilization needs." 6 months later, Admiral Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of the New Earth Embassy station in orbit around the